Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Valeria Pignataro, Scientific Officer of EPTRI, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the second event of EPTRI for the European Biotech Week. Today's topic is the biotech approach to pediatric medical devices. Just some brief information. Today's webinar is scheduled for 1 hour. Please turn your camera off and mute your microphone. If you have any question or comments, they are more than welcome, and I ask you to write them in the chat box. The slides and the recording will be available on the EPTRI website and YouTube channel. The meeting is being recorded for dissemination purposes. If you want to reach us in the next days, you can find us at the EPTRI website or at our email address. Today's agenda foresees two eminent speakers. The first will be Professor Paul Dimitri, Professor of Child Health and Consultant in Pediatric Endocrinology at the Sheffield Children's Foundation Trust, and he will talk about the convergent technologies in child health. The second speaker is Professor Annalie Weinberg, Professor of Orthopedic and Trauma specialized in children's trauma at University of Graz, and she will talk about the pediatric orthopedic trauma, resorbable implant from bench to bedside. At the end of the presentation, there will be a question and answer sessions.
Thank you for joining. I hope you can hear me. It's just loading up my presentation, which is child health. So I thought it would be good. So previous, please, if you sorry, we're back. Just thank you again. Okay, so I thought we'll just pause there for a minute until the slides are up. So I'll start with my presentation as Valeria is loading up. So I'm a professor of child health at Sheffield Children's Hospital, and I also head up the National Institute of Health Research for Health Research, the Children and Young People's MedTech Cooperative. Could I have the next slide, please? So, as I said, I'm involved with the National Institute for Health Research, MedTech and In-vitro diagnostic cooperatives in the UK, and there are 11 of these that have been established throughout England to support expertise and to develop capacity in the National Health Service in the UK to develop and evaluate new medical technologies and in-vitro diagnostics. And you can see from the map there are a number of different specialty areas that we cover. And if you go to the right-hand side of the map on your screen, you'll see where we're based in Sheffield, which is the NIHR Children and Young People MedTech Cooperative. And this is the only paediatric MedTech cooperative in this network. Next slide, please. So I head up the NIHR Children and Young People MedTech Cooperative, and my program manager, Nathaniel Mills, is also online as well. Essentially, we lead this from Sheffield Children's NHS Foundation Trust in the UK, but we bring together 7 different hospitals from the UK to focus on 7 different paediatric themes where technology is developed and evaluated. And you can see the themes there in the square on the right-hand side. And we can also introduced very recently a neonatal technologies theme as well. So each of those themes is spread around the country. We work collaboratively to support technology development in those thematic areas. Next slide, please. So to start with my presentation, I thought it would be helpful really for me to talk about some of the challenges that we have in paediatric technology development. And this is relevant across the field of convergent technologies and other aspects of technology in child health as well. The first is the versatility that's required around child health technology development. So we're dealing with a broad spectrum in terms of age, right the way from preterm babies through to adolescence. So we have the challenge of growth and development. There are physiological, anatomical and psychosocial changes that are very diverse through that age spectrum. And so we have to adapt technologies in specific disease states to deal with those individual age ranges. And we also deal with when we talk about pediatrics or children, we're not talking about a disease, we're talking about a population of people or a population of children. So there is a diversity and complexity in that population. So this is not just about developing a technology for one specific disease area or one specific organ. This is about multiple different specialty areas of pediatrics. There's a greater portion of rare diseases that we see in children and young people. About 75% of rare diseases occur in the under 5s, sadly many of whom die by the age of 5 years. So we have to think about the viability of our technologies in very specific groups and often very small rare disease groups as well. But that being said, there is a misconception from the commercial sector that paediatrics is a small area. But if we think, for example, in the UK, for disease prevention, our population of children is about 20 to 25% of the population. So we're looking at a population of about 18 million children and young people. So there are real commercial opportunities there for areas such as prevention and broader health support through childhood. There is an issue about scalability. So it's, we develop technologies in different centres, but we need to support adoption and spread across our own country and across Europe and beyond as well. And there is also an issue of transferability. So I mentioned about the age spectrum earlier. And when we think about technology introduction, it's often the parents that need to use it when children are younger, but that then has to transfer or transition into the use of technologies by adolescents independently. And then there's the issue of attrition. Children and young people get bored of technologies very quickly. And in the same way as that happens in the gaming world, where technologies are advanced and developed through an iterative approach, we have to think in the same way for child health technologies. Next slide, please. And there are issues around health technology development. So there is currently a lack of targeted health technology for children. It's often developed in individual centres and then not scaled up or adopted even across the same region, let alone countries or across continents. Sometimes, well, a lot of the time up until recently, technologies were repurposed from adult technologies with quite suboptimal results. And in some cases, actually, those technologies or innovations resulted in complications and damage in children and young people. And children have different disease and presentations, so this is different from the adult world. So repurposing technologies is not always suitable. And that we also, within our UK infrastructure and within other infrastructure, challenges around using traditional research trials to assess technologies. We need new methodologies that are rapid and low cost in making sure that we assess technologies quickly so they get to market and adopted quickly within the healthcare service. Next slide, please. And many of you online will know what we're talking about when we speak about technology or devices. So there are multiple different areas: virtual reality, augmented reality, machine learning, biosensors, assistive technology, robotics, and so on and so forth. So there are a broad range of technologies that we develop and use within child health. Next slide, please. And just on that subject of investment in digital health innovation, that actually, this is it from the US, but there is a massive disproportion in the funding for child health technologies compared to other technologies for the adult sector. So you can see there that only 0.7% of children's digital health funding within the US in 2020 was present, compared to 21.6 billion or what would essentially be 99.3% of funding for adult health technologies. Next slide, please. And one of the other things that we need to think about when we develop these technologies is the integration in what we call innovation systems. So technologies do not work in isolation. They need a support network and need to be integrated into clinical health networks or clinical care pathways. So we need to think about service integration, about the fact that those that are delivering the service are happy to use them. That's around clinical acceptance. We need to think about how those technologies are bought by those that commission and procure health services. And then when we are using them with children and young people, there needs to be a patient and family trust and acceptance of those technologies. Otherwise, they are rejected and not used. And as with all technologies, whilst they're developed by either clinicians, academics, or industry, for those technologies as they're integrated clinical care pathways need ongoing support. Next slide, please. Could I ask whoever has got their microphone to mute, please? Okay. So when we think about introducing technology for use in children and young people, there are some issues. There is a kind of naive acceptance that children love technology and they will just happily use it. But actually, we have published in this area to show that actually there is not always the acceptance that we would expect from children and young people there, and also from those that deliver the service as well. So as I mentioned previously, there needs to be a trust in the technology, and those technologies need to be reliable and integrated well into the service. There is also a concern around data usage, so how children and young people perceive their data is going to a third party, around peer-to-peer support and safety and confidentiality. And there's also there needs to be a focus on quality, that those technologies are not only accepted, but usable and developmentally appropriate. And of course, we need to think about the time required for training those that are delivering technology within a service and those that are using the technology as well. Next slide, please. So we move on to this model of convergence, and I've said in this slide a new scientific model, but it's actually not so new. This concept of convergence in technology has been around for many years now, probably in terms of its terminology around a decade or so. But actually it's probably been around longer, because we've been using this model for over a decade, but we're now starting to think about bringing specialty groups together to focus on this idea of convergence. And the convergence is exactly what you would expect in technology development. There's the convergence of those working with information or information technology and hardware, software and communications, with those that are working in the biotech industry around pharmaceuticals, diagnostics, etc., and then nanotechnologies. And when we see an integration or convergence of those technologies, as you see in the middle of the slide, you start to get technologies that are developed that are drawing in from multiple different technology groups to develop really quite advanced and state-of-the-art technology to support healthcare, and in this case specifically children's healthcare. So many of the technologies I showed you on that hexagonal slide are starting to come together within this model to support convergent technologies. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of convergent technologies, because that previous slide is quite complicated. And actually, when you see this in practice, you start to understand the power of convergence in different specialty or different technology specialty areas to develop devices. So this is in my area of expertise. This is in paediatric endocrinology. So this is a growth hormone delivery device. This is the EasyPod produced by Merck Serono. This is a really clever device, because up until this was developed some years ago, growth hormone was delivered by pen devices in a similar way that you would give insulin to a diabetic. But this is the device that has a skin sensor on it. It can sense when a dose is given. It tells you how much dose is given. It will record how many, the dose frequency, and it will transfer this information to a digital platform from a docking station that you can see on the bottom right hand of the slide here. So this is a very advanced device, But what I'm going to show you next shows you the advantage of using this, something that's quite technologically advanced in growth hormone therapy. So next slide, please. So to train young people and families on this device now, Merck have developed what's called augmented reality training. So this has really facilitated and advanced the way we deliver training for those using quite advanced and technological devices. So we can now utilize mobile phones or tablets to show young people and parents how to use these devices almost in a three-dimensional and real way, so they can work through this without having to go through a manual. Next slide, please. And now what we say when we take the device and then we train those families of young people is something called system convergence, where you take a device and integrate a device which is already developed through convergence into a system where there are advantages to multiple different stakeholders. So you can see on the right-hand side of the slide there's information going to doctors and nursing staff. There are benefits through online platforms to personalize treatment and personalize the experience of the patients and parents using the device, therefore translating into improved outcomes for patients. And then we can transfer information to patients and caregivers, such as monitoring injections, then receiving reminders and transferring educational materials onto these platforms. And through this device as well, there are integrated platforms that then provide us with real-world and aggregated data to give us insights into growth hormone therapy in this population group. Next slide, please. And this is the patient interface from that particular device. So on the left-hand side there, you can see a growth chart. So the patients and families can record the height to see how effective the growth hormone therapy is. And they can see how many doses they've given. So you can see on the right-hand side there, the green square boxes are a dose given. The circles are a dose missed. And they can get an aggregate of that data as seen in the center there as to what's happening in terms of their dose given and their height gain. So this is system convergence. This is bringing a device and then integrating the information from the device into a digital platform. Next slide, please. And what we then get in the next level up is an ecosystem of convergence, where you have these devices that, you know, connected or auto-injector. You've got a mobile app for patients and parents and caregivers that gives them all this information, such as reminders, the growth charts, the height reporting and educational contact, and the tools for physicians in terms of adherence monitoring for doses given through that device. We can track growth, and we can integrate that information into electronic medical records. And that creates this digital health ecosystem where we get big data sets from thousands of patients, which can become aggregated and anonymized, and we can start to understand the impact of growth hormone therapy, which has been now looked at not just on a national perspective, but we're doing that on a continent by continent perspective as well. Next slide, please. So here's a similar but different technology. So this is the insulin pump. So this combines really quite complex and sophisticated devices linked through an algorithm to create what's called an artificial pancreas. So how this started, so I haven't worked in diabetes for many years, but when I was working in diabetes, the insulin pump was just coming in, and that's what you can see, excuse me, in the top right-hand corner there. So the insulin pump gives regular insulin with a background amount of insulin to patients with type 1 diabetes, and then we'll give bolus doses when the patient is taking a sugary drink or eating. And on the other side, there is of the technology is what's called a continuous glucose monitoring system, where you can monitor interstitial glucose up to 600 to 700 times a day. So whereas patients used to take their blood glucose every 3 or 4 times a day, now we're getting multiple readings to give you almost a continuous graph of what's happening with glucose. Now the great thing that's happened is that researchers have combined the insulin pump with the continuous glucose monitoring system to give what's called an artificial pancreas, where the CGM sensor measures the amount of glucose. It then transfers that to a digital platform that then uses a sophisticated algorithm to then tell the insulin pump how much insulin to deliver. So it's a hugely important device in really integrating two technologies, for one, that tries to mimic what happens in the human pancreas. The challenge for children is the difference in body size and insulin secretion, which varies at in different age groups. Next slide, please. And here's just a sort of summary slide of what I've called getting smart. So there are other smart devices out there as well. There are smart inhalers that measure doses to given from metered dose inhalers, and there are smart medicines that you can swallow that have a chip in that monitor adherence. And this, in particular, this was used in patients to begin with mental health problems where there was a concern about compliance. So we'd monitor compliance with these tablets through these digital technologies. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is moving to different convergent technology, but this is converging viral vectors and gene therapies. So viral vectors represent one approach of being able to deliver gene therapies, and they're highly efficient and they can target specific tissues, but they can also have complications. And so what's in development at the moment are synthetic vectors such as liposomes or polymers that are potentially safer, cheaper, and easier to manufacture, but they're currently far less efficient in delivering the genetic treatment. And so a major challenge in the future will be being able to develop an appropriate delivery system that is safer to deliver gene therapy or a synthetic small RNA molecule into the cell. Next slide, please. So this is a patient that we have at Sheffield Children's Hospital. This is baby Edward. I can say his name because this is in the media. He received a potentially life-saving drug called Zolgensma, and that prevents paralysis and prolongs the lives of children with a rare disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And it's a single-dose transformative gene therapy that's indicated for specifically type 1 spinal muscular atrophy. And that's caused by a gene defect in the SMN1 gene, and which is needed to produce an essential protein for the normal functioning of nerves. This is at the moment, and this is now being given in 4 centres in the UK, Sheffield being one of them, and it is now being cited as the most expensive treatment in the NHS at the moment. Next slide. Okay, so this is very interesting. These materials have been around for some years now, but again, convergent. Another example of convergent therapy in surgery. So these have been around, as I say, for well over a decade now. These are shape memory materials, and the main attractive feature of these materials is that they have capabilities of recovering their original shape after large deformations induced by mechanical load, and then they can maintain that deformed shape until they come in contact with heat and then recover their original shape. So they can be inserted through small holes during endoscopic surgery and then converted into more bulky medical devices by temperature change, or alternatively fiber optic lighting systems. So this particular device is used for a condition called an atrial septal defect, which is a congenital defect in children where they have a hole in the top 2 chambers of the heart. So this device uses wires and an impermeable polyurethane membrane. The insertion procedure involves getting a catheter and the crimped device through a large vein called the superior vena cava. You then position the catheter in the top left side of the heart, and then you release half the device, and then you complete the procedure by releasing the second part of the device into the right-hand side. So you block that hole essentially with this specific memory, shape memory material that's shown on the right-hand side here. Next slide, please.
Paul, I have to say you that you have 5 minutes.
Okay, so I've got just 4 slide, so I'll run through these very quickly. Thanks, Valeria. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about transdermal drug delivery in children. So you can see in the bottom middle of the slide there are clear advantages of transdermal drug delivery in children, in that they have, because they don't involve injections or taking oral medications, which are difficult for small children. Next slide. Next slide, please. And those transdermal drug delivery devices are delivered through active methods or passive methods. So the active methods are ways in which you change the skin layer through active methods to make the skin barrier more easy to cross, or using passive methods, again, to impact on the skin barrier to allow medicines to transfer. Next slide, please. And this is how these are integrated through Convergence. So they work on generations, first, second, and third generations, using strategies to go through different barriers to get through to the more complex combination therapies to deliver drugs across the skin. So these are opportunities in the future for transdermal delivery of medicine for children. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide. This is a solution looking for a problem, and I just wanted to leave this with you. This is work from colleagues of mine at the University of Sheffield. They've developed this robot, this is an origami robot, that when you put it into a solution, it unfolds. So it was a nice capsule, it unfolds, and then starts to move around that solution. So what they have created is a solution, something that is potentially applicable to healthcare. And then what they've thought about doing is moving that origami robot into the gastrointestinal tract, where they can move a battery, attach the robot to the battery and through the gastrointestinal tract. Battery very, very corrosive, they're swapped by young children. Alternatively, in matching for so here is the robot, nice capsule, and then the movement is towards the peptic ulcer where it can patch it. So here is robotics being moved into a convergent technology into gastrointestinal therapies in children. But something for you to think about, possibly other adaptations as well. Next slide, please. So I'll leave this because I'm out of time, but it's just this slide thinks about the next steps for the needs around convergent technologies in child health. Next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation. So thank you very much for listening. Sorry I didn't get to speak to you about the very last slide. If you need more information and would like to contact us, that's our web address, our Twitter handle, and our email address. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much also for the invitation. I have to say now you have really to step to a very basic, simple problem, because I'm more a craft woman and not so, it's not so complex, but even this is to get forward in the last years. And so I will start now in my career. It starts with Oscar. When I was, it's okay, yes, it's the right slide. It starts with Oscar. When I started my career, it was normally like this, that we don't operate on children. We just put them in hospital, and if we can't make it with a cast, we make a traction extension. I don't know if you know this, we just put some steel implants through the knee, and then we pull on the leg and trying to have alignment. This changed, next slide. But during my career, I was always busy with the question, what is an ideal implant for children? And as you may answer it better than I am, it's like this, that Oscar never wants to see a doctor if it's possible. He not wants to go to any hospital visits. And in children say he not wants to stay away from the family. And if you look at his personal situation, he would like to have a minimum of pain as a result, which is in most cases a result of manipulation like re-reduction, etc. And at the end, he likes to have a healthy restoration of the body without any metal or material which could harm the body. And the bone is one of the easiest one because really can restore it. If you have a lesion of a muscle or tendon, it always end in a scar, which means not that it's not functional, but you can't get rid of restores. Bone you can get restores, and typical for children is that if they have a lesion, it's not the muscle, it's not the tendon. In most cases, it's the bone. And what he also wants, he wants no effect on his growth. Next slide, please. So if you are looking on this, then we have to say ideal implant for children. This one, when I start, it not exist. And if you look on today's update, then we can say since 2000, we had an increase in interest because to let a patient stay 6 weeks in hospital, nobody would accept. And it's not the patient who triggered this. It was the socio-economic systems who drive this. And what happened it's around 2000, when you decided to operate on kids, you just adapt the dimension from the adult's device to kids. And that's it. No more you have to do as if you want to go to regulatory body. Nothing asks you about the needs of kids. And so, but we have to discuss what kid needs as an implant. They have other demands. Their problem is not that the fracture healed, it always healed. The time for consolidation is much shorter than in adults. The biomechanics is difficult, and you can trust children more than any adults, and the children will not walk if it's Humbert himself or if the patient has pain. Their lifetime has an other demand. They want to have a healthy implant which not harm the body, and we want not to have any growth disturbances. But all these are not covered by the MDR or any other regulatory issues. On the other side, we have no grant survival in the last year, and I think Paul has shown this quite good, that the amount of money who invest in children's disease or treatment is really low. Next slide. Next. If we are looking on this, we have no grants. The industry is not interested. They said they are not interested. They have a big market in children, but they always said, why should we change anything? We make a lot of money with traditional implants, which are cheap to produce and very cost-intensive to sell it. Is there really no market? I think Paul just mentioned that 1/3 of the world are children. The other thing is that we need in children a longer perspective. Growth disturbances, we can't investigate in the 2 or 3 year period of grant duration. So we have really several challenges and bias why nothing is going forward in the last 20 years. And if you are looking in the world, we are talking of healthy food, we are talking of diminishing whatever, but nobody says something about healthy implant. It's not an issue at all, but in my opinion, it is an issue. Every child would like to have a healthy implant. Next slide. So when I start and get my, and not before I start, I just want to say, and also we have to reflect that basic research needs the clinical research and backwards so that we can really improve, and there we have, or we need good networks. I'm not in such a good network like Paul, but I think that's the future too, to have the best networks in every direction. Next slide. Next slide. So when I start my career on thinking about what would be the best implant for children, then it's very easy to come to the conclusion to say, the easiest way is that it get resorbed, because then we at least have not a second surgery for implant removal, despite the fact that I also said 20 years ago, I want to have a healthy implant, which means I don't want to have any implant which has any rare earth or anything which is not normal for the body. Then it gets a little bit more challenge. And I discover is not the right word, but I'm working on magnesium now since 12 years and I have in between and during while I have really a name for it. I said I want to have a magnesium-based implant, but with no rare earth, and this we developed in the last years. Next slide. What is the good thing? We now have an implant which is only based on magnesium, zinc, and calcium, which means that we have really healthy ions which could be in the body and get out or included in the bone. On the other side, if I would use any new implant, I want to be aware that we have no effect on the growth plate, that we have really a restoration of the body without any material which could harm the body. And so we start to look on these criteria which nobody is doing. But I always said, if I go into the body of a child, I not want to harm not even one kid. So let's go on. Next slide. So we had what we have done. Click forward because I think they are a little bit behind the other ones. Yes, stop. It starts with magnesium. So the challenge was to get a magnesium implant without rare earth or gadolinium or whatever they mix to it to make it more stable. This was the first challenge. We worked a long period together with the ETH Zurich. And then we are started in rats, but rats are not so similar to humans, so at least you need a big animal trial. So we go into several sheep trials. Then we have done a first human study, and now we are working on growth plate effects. And at least we will start next year multi-center clinical trial. But go ahead. I just want to mention we have done in the last years. Click again because one picture is missing. So ESIN, it's an intramedullary nail, which you see here on the picture, is used for stabilizing bone fractures in children. So we use different kinds of them and product them and put them into sheaths and looked also what's coming out. Next slide. We figured out. Next slide. We figured out the degradation process, which is it's okay, which is longer than expected. At least we need 3 years that all the material is removed. But at the end, if you know you have to put into the animal 3 millimeter rods, it's in total 20 millimeter, it's in total 6 millimeters. So you have a lot of material in the bone. But the good news is that the bone completely restored. Next slide. We also done histological evaluation in every part. After 6, 12, half a year, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. Here you see a 3-year ones, and you have only particles of rest of the material. It's really gone away. Next slide. So now we can summarize. Next. We looked also on the growth length because we go through the phases. Normally you got with the implants not through the phases. We go through the phases. We want to know if we can harm the growth plate. In our trial, we couldn't figure out any growth plate irritation, but we will come later again to this point. Next slide. Next. So what could we conclude out of this first preclinical study? We could trans-epiphyseal insert a nail. We have less gas evolution by reducing the total amount of surface, which means we have a higher flexibility. So also we can use one nails, and also in further research, we can use the material in different ways, also to cross the phases, which is not possible with the material we have on the market. Next slide. But we also want to see what happened with this system if we treat fractures. Does they heal? Next slide. This is also published out of our group. And you see we have done an open wedge osteotomy and fixed the pieces with 2 screws and look on the phases and also on the fracture healing. Next slide. Next. Go. So we do histology, micro-CT, statistic, etc. PP, next slide, please. What we can summarize. that we had no influence on the tibial growth, and the fracture healing was that all fracture healed in between 12 weeks, 25% at 3 weeks, at 6 weeks 50%, and at least the other 25% were healed after 12 weeks. As we have a big animal model, it's a big challenge because you can't do a micro-CT like we do it in rats, which is ongoing. It's always the same animal. Here we have to euthanasia the animals because it's not possible to make histology and stuff like this over time. So we only can look on the length, but the length was not irritated. Next slide, please. Here we have some histological pictures. I can't go too much into the depths, but the red color is the new bone formation on top of the material. And the good news is, instead of non-degradable implants, you never have an interface like with non-degradable implants, which makes an interface where you can have particles of bacteria over years, and after a certain time it gets infected or it gets inflamed, and then you have a bacterial infection. This is a problem of the interface. This we don't have, and we see a good on-growth of the bone to the implant. Next slide. So the next step was to go in an adult, because this was mandatory before we can go in a child trial. So the last 3 years ago, we went into patients, with 20 patients. It's not a new material. There exist other companies who do also magnesium implants, but they all have rare earth or yttrium to make it suitable for medical devices. And so this was the first clinical trial, which only exists out of which was based on magnesium, zinc, and calcium. Next slide. We do follow-up, we do the scoring system. It is also published in 2020. Next slide. Next. And here you see also, which is always interesting, magnesium is not, it is a material which was used in medicine. And then the steel industry came, and then the people changed to steel. But before, they had a lot of experience with magnesium, and they also can show that the bone is healing under magnesium. And the Nature article now also has shown that magnesium is osteoinductive, not only conductive, so it helps also that the bone heals. Next slide. Fractures. Next trial. Next slide. Next. Here you see the results. Also here the fracture were healed in between 2 and 12 weeks, and all fracture healed. Next slide. Next. Here you see a clinical picture, and I don't know, do you see my arrow? I guess no. But if you look on the blue arrow, there was the magnesium screw, and what you see where the degradation took part, you will see this in the bone. Yes. Thank you. You will see this in the bone, and by time you not see anymore anything of the implant. What is also interesting, the screw or the head of the implant is resorbed first, because there the soft tissue is, and as you know, soft tissue has more vessels and more blood supply than the bone, so that's why it's faster on the screw, on top of the screw, because the screw head is always out of the bone. Next slide. Had a good result in our first clinical trial in men. We have excellent functional outcomes. We could see that we have a bone fracture healing. We not need to remove anything, and we can go in further application in different situations, like oral maxillofacial surgery, which will happen next year. Next slide. But for children, this is not enough. And as you see now here, it's really nice to see. If you see here the titan screw, you see that the titan screw, if you go through the physis, makes the growth arrest. That's why we are not able to bring devices through the physis. If we have to do it, we have to remove them very early, not to have physiodesis. which also on the other hand is used for some indication that where we need an epiphysiodesis, we use medical devices which are not resorbable. This was something which came out in the open wedge osteotomy, and we said, okay, this was by chance that we detected that the magnesium screw get broken, which is a good sign because then the growing could go on. Parts stay in the physis, the rest go to the metaphyseal part, and this is what helps, which makes no growth arrest. And then we are looking also on growth stop. Next slide. So it's an ongoing study where we looked on this. Next slide. This is just to say that sheep has a physis all over his life, but has no growing potential. So we want to know if the screw package can be standardized, could be reproducible, then we have no growth discrepancy maybe, and then we can use also those devices in different ways. Next slide. Here is the whole setup. I don't want to go too much into the depths because it's an ongoing, but we do everything which is important for doing such a study and have high quality of science. Next slide. We go through the physis and also use the animal to do some pull-out testing, which is on the right side with the green screws. So this was at least trying to answer two questions. First is the pull-out. First is what happened if we directly go through the physis with the physis and break the screw and the growing is going on. And the second was what is the pull-out force, which is always necessary because we want to be over polymer. We don't want to have the same as titanium because, as you know, titanium has a very high strength, but it has a disadvantage for the body because the E module between bone and screw is too high, and this makes shear shielding and makes problems for the screw's tooth. And so we want to know. Next slide. Here we measure the length, and we see that we have a difference in length regarding titanium. So titanium screws, I just summarize it, not to go too in detail everything. I just want to show that titanium makes a stop of the growth or let the leg in total grow slowly, which makes a difference between the control and the titanium screws. It's in most cases not clinically relevant because the amount is big, but at least we have a phenomenon like this, which is always ignored. Next.
Professor Weinberg, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah. I'm just finished. Quasi finished. Next. 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 Next slide. So this is the pull out. Next. It's just to see how the bone is around the screws, and here you see that we are higher than polymers and lower than titan. Next. So we can conclude that in our study and the preliminary results say that we have no damage to the growth plate, we have no growth discrepancy, we have good ingrowth so far, and we have a good evaluation also in the human study. Next slide, please. And here we are on the next steps. So the next is a multicenter study with key wire for treatment of supracondylar fractures and other fractures in children. And we also do a randomized study where we use titan, polymer, and magnesium. Next. And to summarize it, we need the basic research to go to clinical research and back. Next. Helps us also to think about tools, how we can measure better materials to the physis and the interaction. In our group, we develop an organo-typical culture model where we can put material onto the physis and look on the reaction of the physis to the material, which is a step better than what we have, because up to now we have no possibility to investigate the organ of growing, which is really demanding and very complex, and it's like an orchestra. And so we have a first attempt to reduce also our animal testing in future. Next slide. Next. And I have to say, it started with Oscar, and my dream is a better implant for his body. took me 25 years and I'm not finished, but I'm proud that now at least the patent were taken over of Biotech. Yesterday they go to the NASDAQ, and I hope they can develop or help to develop this implant that it will be on the market for our kids in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Baim. I invite all of you to question in the chat box. In the meantime, I have a question for Professor Dimitri. What we should expect from medical devices for children in future?
That's a really big question. Thanks for it's a good starting question. I think we will expect more. I think that's the open answer, which is I think the world is waking up to the fact that children are a big population, that it's not the small population that I think has been perceived incorrectly. I think we will see a move away from repurposing, which I spoke about in my presentation, and that we will see medical devices specifically targeted for populations of children. I am hoping, and this is part of what I do as my day job, that we get significantly greater funding from both public sector and private sector organisations to develop these technologies. And I know we have been working together through EPTRI to try and drive a network, a collaborative network to support the development of technologies in specific areas. So I think it's these networks similar to that which I lead in the UK that are going to be fundamental in driving that commercial offering. So it's by us working together across centres, identifying unmet need, working with funders for targeted funding in those areas, and that, as I say, includes private sector funding as well. I think we will develop through those networks a credible and scalable offering to industry. So I think it's, you know, in summary, I think this is an exciting area to be in. It's an area of growth. I think there is a potential for commercial growth there. And I think in the next 10 years, we will see technology change for children. And we'll also we'll see a change in the way healthcare is delivered. So my hope would be that we will see less children in the hospital and more care delivered in the community, but monitored by specialist centres where needed. So there'll be a move away from very hospital-centric care to hospital, communicative care, where we communicate with patients, but we keep them in the community and we support the children and young people to go to school and to remain with their families.
Thank you so much. For Professor Weinberg, which is the major challenges for pediatric implants?
I think the major, when we come back to Paul, I would say children have always accident. Even if you have the best prevention, it's normal that they fall down. And I think it's better than trying that they don't have any injuries. It's important that if they have injuries, we really have implants which doesn't harm the body. And I said always, they want to wish a healthy implant. And unfortunately, titanium is far, far away from being healthy. The problem is that to detect this is a little bit more demanding. Nobody is doing it. And the other side is now all countries starting to leave implants in children because they said it's too expensive to remove this, like in Norway or in Sweden. And I hope that my work can help that the people remove the implants or using implants which are more healthy. And a lot of these fractures we also can treat with polymers. It's also something which we solved. Though the challenge is on the other side also for orthopedic to make more design for the demands of the necessity to treat deformities, but this is the next step, or it's another step.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I maybe invite you to provide a sort of closure opinion, closure reflection from both of you.
Okay, well, I'll start. So thanks for that, Larry. And maybe this is a good opportunity to basically focus on that next step slide, which I didn't have enough time to present. But I think in terms of next steps for convergence of technologies, there is definitely a need to integrate disciplinary approaches that were previously distinct. And you know, we work across multiple different specialty areas and multiple different professional areas to develop these technologies. And there is a real opportunity here to create new pathways and opportunities for scientific and technology advancement. And what we need to do through that is support collaboration, and that's in part through these networks, and support communication. And then finally, it's about aligning unmet need with biotechnology convergence. So we know as clinicians the unmet needs. We know where the problems are. What we need to understand is where the potential technology applications are. And conversely, the private or commercial sector are excellent at making technologies, but they need to know where the unmet needs are. So by working together across the private and public sector and across multiple different professional disciplines, we have a real opportunity in the future to create technologies for child health.
Thank you. Professor Weinberg?
I can just support Paul. I think he had said everything. I think he covered what is also my wish, which is maybe sometimes very more basic, step by step, but I think network is the most important. And I fight a long time that the material science earlier just connect the surgeon, that the material development is not just doing by itself, just doing it with the needs. And the second is to get awareness in the society that children have a right to be treated according to their demands. And I think we have to think about their demands and not what we wish, also as surgeon, you know. And when we turn it around and look more what the patient wants to have, then we will also find solution. We have much more forces and power when we look to the other side than only on the side as an adult. And I think this is very important to develop things, even little things, you know. It's not always the great world, but it is an important world.
Thank you. I think that your presentation were very interesting. I thank you as speakers, and I declare close this webinar. Thank you for joining, and thank you for our speakers.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Dimitri, you have to talk now. I said so.